Stairs where it's a lot cooler. Jeannie now off to tickle her toes in that pool by the Eiffel Tower if she's got any sense. Jeannie, thank you very much indeed. Welcome then to the France 24 debate. Let's tell you a little bit more what's happening this Thursday then. This Thursday morning in Rome, Italy's former Premier Silvio Berlusconi had very much an appointment with fate. He was appealing against a conviction for tax fraud. The verdict carries a sentence now of 1 year in jail. That was negotiated. At 76, Berlusconi would at worst face house arrest, not prison, but the additional penalty, a 5-year ban from public office, from politics, is perhaps causing him wider concern. Our guests to discuss the trials and tribulations of Silvio Berlusconi are wound up and ready here in the studio. They are, in no order of preference, it's just the way it fell. Gregory Viscusi, who's a journalist at Bloomberg News. Thank you, sir, for joining us. On the other side of the studio, not necessarily against Gregory, but always someone with something to say. And Elizabeth Moutet, columnist at the Sunday Telegraph. Good to see you. We have a guest joining us by Skype from Rome, a trusted source on all things Italian, James Walston, Professor of International Relations at the American University of Rome, specialising in Italian politics and modern history. I'm looking forward to your perspective, sir, on the Berlusconi story. Joining us from London, we have Alberto Nardelli of Tweet Minister, which I understand, Alberto, is a political social network. Is that right?
Yes, we analyse politics and elections using Twitter.
OK, we're going to get back to you very, very shortly, sir. Do bear with us. And if you want to join in at any point, speak, and I will try to bring you into the conversation as quickly as possible. Sometimes it's a little difficult with people in different places, but we'll start here in the studio. I'm Elizabeth Gregory. Berlusconi, what is it about him, Anna Elizabeth, that makes him such a controversial figure? Where'd you start with it? There are so many things, aren't there?
Because the people who support him still support him. He, still manages to get quite a bit of the popular vote, and the people who hate him very much. So he's a bit like Sarkozy in France or George W. Bush used to be in America. He's a very polarizing figure, and right now you have, in addition to that, these series of court cases brought against him. And to some extent, even among people who are not especially his partisans, there begins to be a kind of feeling that perhaps he's being piled on. I was just given outside the studio by one of our colleagues going into the French debate on the same subject, that recently a murderer was in the Puglia region of Italy, was given an 8-year sentence, and before it was negotiated, Berlusconi's sentence was 7 years. And you start thinking, this man is not a child murderer. On the one hand, he's a philanderer, which used to be the national sport in Italy, and I can't imagine that Italy has changed that much. And second, he's a tax evader, which again used to be the national sport in Italy. And there's an element, a feeling, and that also happens, for instance, in France with Monsieur Sarkozy, that there's a kind of cherry picking from the judges. So all of this makes it a very interesting case to watch.
Gregory, tax evasion and philandering, the national sport in Italy.
I mean, that might be a little unfair, but I do think that part of his appeal is that there's a certain type of Italian male that would like to be him. You know, he owns a football team, he's rich, he doesn't pay all his taxes, he ditched his first wife and got a, sort of younger, rounder, better one. But bizarrely, there's a lot of women in Italy who see him as being kind of the ideal son-in-law. Because I don't quite get it, but he makes people laugh, he's friendly, he's avuncular. I think before people pile in and criticize Berlusconi too much, you do have to ask, if he's so terrible, as so many foreign commentators and so many people in Italy think, then why has the left not been able to unseat him for so long? And I think you really have to, the left has run one dreadful campaign after another, has picked one dreadful candidate after another. And so it's a bit by default in some cases that he's won, but your point is very well taken, that he is, you love him or you hate him, and I don't think we're waiting for this decision. It's not going to change anybody's mind. Everyone in Italy has made up their mind about him, whether they love him or hate him. So we're not, no one's mind is going to be changed by the decision we're waiting for tonight.
Well, you never know what happens in this debate. Maybe we come up with some ideas that might change some people's minds. Let's bring in James Walston there, who's observing from Rome, of course, where the case is being heard, where Berlusconi's fate will be decided. Mr. Walston, in terms of the appeal of Berlusconi, how do you read it? What do you see as the big appeal of Berlusconi, why people love him, equally why people hate him?
Well, first of all, he's one of the richest men in the country. For most of the last 20 years, he's been the richest man in the country. He has control over 3 of the national television networks, a couple of newspapers, News Weekly, and the biggest single publisher in the country. When he was in government, as is normal in Italy, he had control of at least two of the public broadcasters. So he had immense media power. He has immense wealth. He has immense patronage. And this is all very useful if you are trying to win friends and win votes.
Is it kind of manipulating with a smile, do you think? Is that what it's about?
He does that and a lot more. He buys people, he promises people all sorts of favors, whether they are detailed favors when he is trying to get votes, get single parliamentarians to support him in his government, or whether he is trying to get votes from the whole Italian population to win an election. He does that very well. He has huge charisma. He's a very good communicator. He does, as your previous speakers have said, he has a football team. He has all sorts of advantages. The older he gets, the more hair he has, and the fewer wrinkles he has, and the more girlfriends he has. And this, as we know, is very good for not just for Italian males, but many Italian females as well. He is also the person who brings together the centre-right and the opponent of the centre-left. 20 years ago, it was the communists. Now it's a little bit more difficult to call the coalition of Christian Democrats and Social Democrats, former communists, with some sort of Moscow brush. But he manages to do that as well. He finds communists even where there aren't any. So for all these reasons, he was able to get last February, he was able to get almost a third of the Italian vote. And we do know that whatever the verdict this evening, he will still be the leader of the centre-right. He will continue to be the leader of the centre-right, even if he's barred from office, even if particularly if there's a big fight over how he should step down as senator, which is one of the things he'd have to do if he's barred from public office. So he's going to be around for another bit yet.
Thank you, Mr. Walston. Bear with us for a second. So what I'm picking up then is that Silvio Berlusconi, all Italian men might want to be him. Many Italian women might want to be with him. The message I got from our respondents on Twitter throughout today has been very different and very negative. We'll bring you some of their responses in a moment. Let's bring in Alberto Nardelli from Tweetminster, who's joining us from London. What do people say about him where you are, sir? What do they say about him on your website?
Well, I think outside of Italy, the opinion is pretty much uniform. So most people don't understand why Silvio Berlusconi has been, until recently, in power so long, and why, after all of these trials, none of the trials have ever ended until maybe this evening into a definitive sentence. But I think the key point is around context. So I agree with one of your previous speakers who outlined how Italy's political system rotates around Silvio Berlusconi, both the centre-left and the centre-right, fundamentally divided into two groups, those which are pro-Berlusconi and those which are anti-Berlusconi. And on the centre-left, this has meant a very weak coalition that has never been able to articulate an alternative to that anti-Berlusconi narrative. I also believe, at the same time, though, I think not wanting to necessarily defend Berlusconi, but I do think it's important to put some of the allegations into context. So he hasn't actually been sentenced definitively in none of his trials. We'll find out in about 20 minutes if he gets sentenced this evening. And as one of your speakers mentioned before, in the Ruby trial, the sentence which was requested is higher than in some cases of manslaughter. And even in this last trial, the prosecutors had to reduce the sentence that they were asking because it was actually above the legal terms for the alleged crime. So it is a very complicated debate, and I think if you look at it within that pro-Berlusconi, anti-Berlusconi context, it's much easier to understand.
Alberto, thank you. It sounds like Alberto's painting a picture of Berlusconi and Elizabeth as a bit like King Lear, a man more sinned against than sinning. Would you?
I think
you wouldn't buy that at all, would you?
Yes, but I think Berlusconi would object so much with all the plastic surgery he's had and all the hair dye and all this wonderful effort. I think he would very much object to be portrayed as Lear, or really radically different Lear. I would take issue with what our colleague on Skype said, which is I don't he may control newspapers and he may have been the head of government at the time when there was two state channels, television channels. But I haven't seen the Italian press, including that which was nominally or financially controlled by him, being very much on his favor. I don't think actually he does much he is as disliked by the press at large in Italy as, again, those leaders who are not liked in France and America have been. I wouldn't say that but I think he feeds off it. So in many ways, this is somebody who is extremely rich and who's been in power or close to power for 17 years, and he manages to exude this sort of outside of power aura of people, for instance, whom the Tea Party likes in America. He's a populist. He's a friendly populist. It's not just that people do not object to the fact that he's rich in a country that used to have a communist party for whom up to 1/3 of the population voted. It's a fantastic phenomenon. And I also would say, if with an adversary like that, if the left and centre-left in Italy haven't been able to get their act together, that is the reason, the public can see it, and that is the reason why Berlusconi, by refraction, manages to be so successful. It's that the rest of the political class in Italy basically is hopeless. Everybody knows that they're at least as corrupt as he is. Possibly they're less competent, and therefore they're corrupt on smaller sums. But this is not enough to build support. There's also the Italians are the first ones to know that their country is in a bad state and has been a very long time. One of the reasons why there has always been support for the European Union in Italy is that they felt that Italy was incapable of building a state system, and therefore that the state could be provided by the European Union. The disappointment right now is that it provides regulation but no state. If somebody like Berlusconi is still in power and has got support and a party of perfectly sort of competent and honest MPs behind him, some of them at least, I know quite a few of them, and they are really first-rate politicians, and that they have made a cold calculation as well as a sympathy calculation, as that, yes, well, that's what he's like, but he's the best we've got.
So I think it's important to add, sorry if I...
No, go Mr. Walston in Rome, yes, go ahead.
That in the past...
I'm terribly sorry.
If you look at the past 17, 20 years in Italy, it's a false myth to believe that Berlusconi has governed for all of that time. That if you look at who's been in power over those years, time in office has almost been divided with the centre-left. And the fact that centre-left governments haven't lasted very long and very often end with infighting, that has gone to strengthen Berlusconi's position. And I think I couldn't stress enough how instrumental to his power is the weakness of his opposition, and that goes well beyond his control.
Yeah, absolutely. The two times that the left put forward a decent candidate, both times Romano Prodi, they won. Romano Prodi is 2-0 against Berlusconi in elections.
Exactly.
Each time he was brought down, though, by parties in his government. And so Berlusconi always said, since then, if you vote for the left, you don't know who you're voting for. They might put someone nice up, a guy like Prodi up, but you don't know what forces behind are working to bring him down. And he's been proved right every time. Every time Prodi went in there, and then he was backstabbed by people around him. And so since then, the left has come up with these other candidates that I don't think they're corrupt. I actually don't buy that the PD has put forward corrupt candidates, but they're just not good campaigners. They're lackluster.
Not all of them.
They have no convinced by that final statement.
No, but he's extremely bright. He's very fast on his feet. He was once a professional tango dancer, I think.
Piano player.
But he can move on his feet very fast and very well, and he can wobble. It's a thing of beauty to behold. It is. There's a Mussolini quote which I will sort of be careful in repeated, but still it's a good one, and it's that it is possible to govern Italy, but it's completely useless. And Berlusconi, I think, has made it his in many ways.
Let's bring in James Walston for more of a bit of recul, as the French say on this one, a little bit of a sort of look back at this kind of thing in many ways. Mr. Walston, is there an historical figure you compare Berlusconi to?
Well, there is. The most obvious one, of course, is the biggest single populist in Italian recent history, which is Mussolini. But they are very different. Mussolini took power with violence, and Berlusconi took power with a very soft sell. He is, and I think I have to take issue with Elizabeth, that His newspapers, his television channels have been extremely important because they do reach a vast number of people, far more than the newspaper. The television is enormously important because Italians tend not to read newspapers. Many newspapers are very anti-Berlusconi, and his own newspaper, Il Giornale, has a very small circulation. But his 3 television channels have a vast public. And when he was in power and when he was Prime Minister, Rai 1 and Rai 2 tend, as they always do, to support the government. But I certainly agree with all the other speakers who said that Berlusconi's second best ally after his wealth and his own charisma has been, of course, the centre-left, because they have done everything they could to not to prevent him getting into power. The original sin with Berlusconi has been his conflict of interest. Nowhere else in Western democracies can you have somebody who controls half of the television media and who is the richest man in the country to continue to control that wealth and those resources while he is the chief executive of the country. It's just unthinkable anywhere. Bernard Tapie would have liked to have tried, but he didn't get very far. No one else anywhere else apart from Thailand. No one in Europe or North America has even begun to try that. And yet, when the Prodi government was in power, when they could have put in a serious conflict of interest law, they didn't. The only conflict of interest law was one which was passed by the centre-right when Berlusconi came back into power in 2002. And it did all sorts of wonderful things, like saying that you couldn't be the chief executive, but you could hold the shares. So Berlusconi had to step down as chief executive of Milan Football Club, but he still held the shares of Mediaset and everything else, all his other holding companies. And I think that's the biggest single problem. And what we're also seeing, and I think this is something which is sometimes neglected in the sort of froth of everyday news, is a fundamental conflict between 2 powers of the state, the executive, and supported by the legislature, and the judiciary. The judiciary is not without faults. It has many serious faults. But what we are seeing, one little version of an end game this evening, is a fight between the powers of the state. And when you start losing a rule of law in a Western democracy, then you're in serious trouble. And that could be one problem. Certainly one thing that has been going on, brewing for 30 years now.
James Walton, thank you very much indeed. We've got plenty of froth here, but also I hope a full-bodied brew underneath it to titillate people's intellectual thoughts about this character, Silvio Berlusconi. One quick tweet before we go into our break. I'm wondering when a movie on Berlusconi's life will be realised. We can't deny we have Hollywood material. There we go.
Hollywood's not done it, but there have been Italian films.
There is a movie.
There is a movie, yeah?
Caimano, how do you say it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we will clarify that after the break. It's important we stop now because we need to get some news and some ads and those kind of things that pay our wages. Stay with us here for part 2 of the France 24 debate.